Peter Thiel stood alone in his office, looking out over the sprawling cityscape. The sun was setting, casting an amber glow over the skyline, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The weight of his next decision hung in the air. He had built PayPal from the ground up, but now, the world was changing in ways he couldn't have predicted. The tech world was in chaos, and his vision for the future was the only thing that kept him going. But what was the cost of chasing an ideal? Was he still the man who believed in the power of innovation to reshape the world? Or had he become just another player in a game of power, money, and influence? The city below, bustling and alive, felt like the pulse of a new era, one that Peter Thiel would help to define. But it was also a world full of traps, shadows, and uncertainties. Peter had always been driven, even from a young age. Growing up in a small town, his mind often wandered far beyond the ordinary, driven by a deep curiosity about how the world worked. He was never content to accept things as they were. But it wasn't until his time at Stanford that he realized his true potential. Surrounded by some of the brightest minds, Peter knew that he could disrupt the status quo, if only he could find the right idea. He threw himself into Silicon Valley's world of innovation, eager to push the boundaries of what technology could do. But with each new venture, each new breakthrough, the path became increasingly treacherous. The line between success and failure blurred, and Peter soon found himself navigating a world where the rules of the game were often stacked against those who dared to think too big. Silicon Valley was a place where anything seemed possible, and Peter was determined to prove that he could be more than just another tech entrepreneur. With PayPal, he had already shown the world his knack for seizing opportunities at just the right moment. But as his company grew, so did the pressure. The financial stakes were high, and each decision felt heavier than the last. His network of investors and co-founders demanded results. But Peter, ever the visionary, kept his eyes fixed on the future. He wasn't just building a company, he was building a new world. A world where technology was no longer just a tool, it was the foundation for a new social order. But the more Peter pushed forward, the more he began to realize that the world he was shaping came with its own set of dangers. Allies turned into rivals, and his closest collaborators began questioning his methods. The fast-paced nature of Silicon Valley meant that you had to make moves quickly, and sometimes those moves came with unintended consequences. Peter's relentless drive was beginning to take a toll on both his company and his personal life. Trust was in short supply, and the road ahead was becoming increasingly uncertain. But Peter was not one to back down. He knew that every decision, every challenge, was part of the price of greatness. As the tension reached its peak, Peter stood at the precipice of something monumental. His company was on the verge of a major breakthrough, but it would come at a cost. The sacrifices he had made, both personally and professionally, had all led to this moment. It was now or never. With a deep breath, Peter made the decision that would change everything. He would take the risk, trust in his vision, and leap into the unknown. The future he envisioned, a world where technology would break down old barriers and create new possibilities, was within reach. But would it be worth the price? As Peter's company began to scale, so did the complexities of the world around him. PayPal was growing faster than he could have imagined, and the early days of scraping by for success now felt like a distant memory. But with growth came new challenges. Investors, stakeholders, and rivals all began to demand more, faster, bigger, better. The pressure mounted daily, and with it came the realization that success in Silicon Valley wasn't just about innovation, it was about control. Peter found himself making decisions that balanced on a razor's edge, and every move seemed to bring more scrutiny. The industry buzzed with excitement and fear, and Peter couldn't shake the feeling that the world he was helping to create could easily collapse under the weight of ambition. As PayPal grew, Peter's role as a leader evolved, and so did his perspective on the tech industry. He was no longer just a visionary entrepreneur. He was becoming a key player in a financial revolution. Peter's sharp mind allowed him to navigate the rapidly changing tides of the industry, But the more success he saw, the more intense the competition became. Each partnership, each deal, felt like a calculated risk. But Peter had always been comfortable with risk. The true challenge now wasn't just innovating, it was maintaining control of what he had created. Every day he had to fight to protect his vision, all while keeping the company on track amidst the growing chaos of Silicon Valley's cutthroat culture. With every triumph came a new set of challenges. Peter soon found himself at the center of a storm, both professionally and personally. The competitive nature of Silicon Valley meant that there were always new players emerging, ready to take his place. Rivals like eBay were encroaching on PayPal's territory, and what had once been a harmonious business was now riddled with internal struggles and external threats. Peter had to make decisions that would not only secure PayPal's future, but also protect his place within the tech elite. The pressure to innovate, to stay ahead, was immense. But Peter's ambition didn't just drive him, it consumed him. And with every step forward, he found himself losing more and more of the balance he once had. The closer PayPal got to its ultimate goal, the harder it became for Peter to navigate the ever-changing tides of the business world. He was constantly balancing the demands of his investors with his own vision for the company. The internal politics at PayPal became more complex, as differing visions among the co-founders and executives led to mounting tensions. Peter, though often seen as the visionary, was no longer in complete control. He faced threats not just from competitors, but also from within his own company. The dream of creating a world-changing platform now seemed more like a battle for survival, one that would require every ounce of Peter's ingenuity and resolve to overcome. Despite the rising tension and constant struggles, Peter never lost sight of his grander vision. The world he dreamed of, one shaped by technology and boundless opportunity, was still within reach. PayPal had become a financial powerhouse, but it was more than that to Peter. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when disruption met vision. The future was always in flux, but Peter was determined to shape it. He knew that in order to truly change the world, he had to remain one step ahead of everyone else. And as PayPal continued to grow, so did his ability to shape the future, one decision at a time. But with every victory, the risks grew higher and the stakes grew greater. As PayPal grew beyond its initial success, Peter found himself at a crossroads. What had begun as a simple idea to disrupt the payments industry was now evolving into something much bigger, a global powerhouse. The impact was undeniable, but so were the challenges. With success came an overwhelming need for more innovation and greater risk. Peter's growing influence in the tech world meant he was now a key figure, not just in business, but in shaping the future of the economy itself. Yet, as PayPal's dominance in the industry grew, Peter was faced with a daunting realization. His company's success also meant he was a target. Rivals, government regulators, and even former allies began circling, and the pressure to maintain his position and protect his empire weighed heavily on him. Despite the mounting pressure, Peter remained focused on his long-term vision. But the road ahead was becoming more uncertain by the day. Despite the success and growth, internal conflicts began to take a toll on Peter. The pressures of scaling the company were becoming evident, not just from external forces, but within his own team. Tensions among the co-founders started to rise, with differing visions for PayPal's future. Peter, once the sole visionary, was now confronted with his team's growing doubts and disagreements. Some wanted to push into new markets, while others believed the focus should remain on solidifying PayPal's position as the leader in digital payments. For Peter, these conflicts were a reminder of how difficult it could be to lead in the fast-paced world of Silicon Valley. The fear of losing control was constant, and the more successful PayPal became, the more difficult it was to manage the competing forces within the company. The external challenges began to grow even more daunting as eBay's acquisition offer loomed large. The idea of selling PayPal to eBay was both an opportunity and a threat. On the one hand, it would bring financial security and instant growth. On the other, it would mean losing the independence that had driven PayPal's success. Peter's reluctance to sell stemmed not just from his desire to maintain control, but from a belief in PayPal's potential to disrupt the world in a way eBay never could. It was a pivotal moment. Should he sell and walk away with a fortune, or should he fight for PayPal's autonomy, betting everything on the belief that he could change the world on his terms? The weight of this decision was not lost on Peter, and he knew that whatever path he chose, there would be no turning back. As Peter deliberated over the offer, the pressure from his investors and co-founders only increased. The idea of financial security and taking the deal was tempting, but it didn't align with Peter's long-term vision. PayPal was more than just a business. It was his mission to reshape the financial system. A sale to eBay would compromise that mission. The internal conflict raged within him, the decision weighing on him with every passing day. Eventually, Peter made the bold decision to reject the offer. He believed that PayPal still had a chance to transform the world of digital payments, but only if it stayed independent. It was a high-risk gamble, but Peter had always been comfortable with risk. As soon as the decision was made, he felt a sense of relief. He had chosen the path that would define the future of PayPal and, ultimately, his own legacy. Peter's decision to turn down the acquisition offer sent ripples through Silicon Valley. He had staked everything on his belief in PayPal's future, but that belief was not universally shared. The rejection created tensions within the company and among investors, some of whom questioned Peter's leadership and judgment. The risks were becoming ever clearer, but Peter remained steadfast. PayPal was not just a business, it was a symbol of innovation, of changing the financial system to empower people in ways traditional institutions never could. The road ahead would not be easy, and the battles Peter faced were only just beginning. But as he reflected on his decision, he knew he had done what he had to do. He had chosen to fight for his vision, no matter the cost. As PayPal continued its ascent, Peter found himself at a crossroads of success and moral ambiguity. The once clear path of disrupting the financial system now seemed blurred by the complexities of power. The pressure to maintain PayPal's dominance was suffocating. The challenges from competitors, the constant need for innovation, and the ever-present demands from investors had created an environment that was far from the idealistic dream Peter once envisioned. With every victory came a compromise. Small, seemingly insignificant at first, but growing over time. As Peter navigated these dark waters, he began to question not just the sacrifices he had made, but the kind of world he was helping to build. Was this the future he had hoped for? Was he contributing to the greater good, or was he becoming part of the very system he sought to upend? The shadows were growing longer, and Peter wasn't sure he could escape them. Peter's growing unease was not just limited to his own conscience, it was also felt within PayPal itself. The company that had once been a symbol of innovation and change was now facing increasing scrutiny. The pressure from regulators, the fear of anti-competitive behavior, and the ethical questions surrounding PayPal's practices began to mount. At the same time, the internal politics of the company were becoming harder to navigate. As Peter fought to maintain his vision, divisions began to form within PayPal's leadership team. The cost of success was becoming clear, and Peter was forced to confront the darker aspects of his empire. The vision he had worked so hard to create was now threatened by the very forces he had once championed: technology, money, and power. It was a paradox Peter couldn't escape. The more he succeeded, the more he risked losing control over the very thing he had built. The deeper Peter ventured into the world of corporate power, the more isolated he became. What once was a passionate pursuit of his vision had slowly transformed into a game of control, manipulation, and compromise. His once close-knit relationships with his co-founders and employees became strained as personal ambitions began to clash with the collective goal. The business world was becoming a battlefield where loyalty was fleeting and alliances were constantly shifting. Peter found himself increasingly alone in the decisions he had to make. He started relying more on his instincts and less on the people who had once supported him. The paranoia grew. Who could he trust? Was everyone around him just playing their part in this high-stakes game? It was a dangerous place to be, and Peter knew he was no longer just fighting for PayPal. He was fighting for survival in a world that had grown far more hostile than he had ever anticipated. The mounting pressure took a toll on Peter's personal life. Relationships that once seemed solid began to unravel. Friends turned into acquaintances, and the weight of his decisions strained even the closest of bonds. The isolation he felt in the office carried over into his home life, where the world outside of PayPal seemed distant and disconnected. Every conversation, every moment of respite, felt like a fleeting distraction from the empire he was trying to build. His relentless focus on success had come at a price Peter was beginning to regret. What had once been a dream of changing the world was now a constant battle against the very system he had sought to challenge. The sacrifices were too high, and Peter began to wonder if the cost was worth it. Was he losing himself in the process? Or had he already crossed a line that couldn't be undone? As the internal turmoil continued, Peter was forced to make decisions that pushed the boundaries of ethics. PayPal's success was no longer just about changing the world. It was about maintaining power and influence at all costs. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and Peter's decisions grew more calculated, more ruthless. He began to question whether the ends justified the means. The financial world he had once viewed as an arena for innovation had become a place of cutthroat survival. Peter was no longer simply disrupting an industry. He was shaping a system that relied on manipulation, secrecy, and control. The more he fought to protect his empire, the more he became entrenched in the very system he had once hoped to break free from. There was no going back, and Peter knew it. The price of success had already been paid, but it was a debt that would continue to grow with each passing day. Peter Thiel's world had shifted once more. Just when it seemed like he had firmly established his dominance, a twist of fate changed everything. The rapid success of PayPal had bred new competition, and now, a threat loomed larger than anything Peter had ever anticipated. A rival company, one that seemed to understand the very core of PayPal's business, was emerging. It wasn't just another tech startup, it was a new wave, one built on ideas Peter had once dreamed of, but never fully realized. The ground beneath him felt shaky, and the foundations he had built began to crack. This new player in the market wasn't just competing for the same customers, it was attacking everything Peter had worked for. The worst part, it had the backing of influential allies, and this time, it wasn't just about innovation. It was personal. For the first time in years, Peter felt vulnerable, and the battle for survival had begun. As the new rival gained traction, Peter's paranoia grew. It wasn't just business. It was now a personal vendetta. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a battle not just for dominance in the tech world, but for control over everything he had built. This new player had tapped into an area of the market that Peter had always been hesitant to explore, an area that was now critical to PayPal's survival. The pressure mounted with each passing day as investors and stakeholders began to question whether Peter had lost his edge. They were growing nervous, and whispers of a potential acquisition surfaced again. Peter, however, was not one to back down easily. His resolve hardened. If PayPal was going to survive, he would have to do more than just defend. It was time to go on the offensive. But in order to win this new war, Peter realized that he had to make a choice that would irrevocably change everything. The revelation came suddenly. A whistleblower within PayPal had leaked crucial data to the rival company, providing them with an edge Peter had never seen coming. It felt like a betrayal of the highest order. Peter's world had always been built on trust, but this breach shattered that foundation. The leak had given the rival company access to confidential strategies and key business insights, allowing them to leap ahead in ways PayPal couldn't anticipate. It was a devastating blow, one that felt deeply personal. Peter's mind raced. Who could he trust now? The feeling of betrayal gnawed at him, threatening to consume him. His own creation was under attack from within, and the consequences were dire. As the storm inside PayPal grew, Peter realized that his greatest challenge might not be the competition outside. It might be the enemies he had unknowingly cultivated within his own ranks. As Peter struggled with the fallout from the leak, the pressure to act grew overwhelming. PayPal's stock was plummeting, and the once strong foundation of his empire now seemed like a crumbling house of cards. He was left with few options. He could either confront the leak head-on and risk exposing PayPal's internal chaos, or he could fight back with everything he had, hoping to outmaneuver his rivals in a desperate attempt to regain control. Peter knew that the path forward would be a brutal one, and that even if he won this battle, he might lose something even more valuable, his soul. The stakes had changed. No longer was this just a fight for the future of PayPal. It was a fight for Peter's own identity. Who was he, if not the visionary leader of a company he had built from the ground up? The lines between personal and professional had blurred beyond recognition, and Peter realized that his decision now would define the man he would become. With his back against the wall, Peter made the most difficult decision of his career. It was time to take a bold step, one that would either destroy his legacy or elevate it to new heights. He chose the latter, plunging into a risky strategy that involved not just a defensive play against the rival company, but a calculated attack on their core. Peter's plan was audacious, involving new alliances, strategic mergers, and a campaign that would not only crush his competitors, but reshape the entire financial landscape. The world would see PayPal not as a product, but as a force that would reshape the global economy. But in making this move, Peter knew the price would be steep. This was no longer a battle for survival. It was a battle for total dominance. And in this high-stakes game, only one could emerge victorious. The weight of his decisions was becoming unbearable. Peter's world, once defined by ambition and an unwavering belief in his vision, had become a battlefield, one where every move felt like a desperate attempt to keep his empire intact. The internal fractures in PayPal had deepened. Trust was a scarce commodity, and the pressure to maintain control was strangling him. His once close relationships with his co-founders had deteriorated, and the external forces, regulators, competitors, investors, were pushing harder than ever. Each day felt like a new crisis, and Peter found himself questioning whether all the sacrifices he had made were worth it. The strain was showing in his health, in his personal life, and in his ability to think clearly. The battle to keep PayPal afloat was consuming him, and he began to wonder if the dream he had fought for so long had already passed him by. The turning point came during a late-night meeting with his remaining trusted advisors. The room was tense, thick with anticipation as Peter laid out his next moves. But for the first time in a long while, his voice wavered. Doubt had crept in, and the weight of the situation was starting to erode his confidence. The plan he had spent weeks developing seemed less like a grand vision, and more like a gamble. The risk was enormous, and Peter could feel the cost of failure looming large. His team, once united by a shared belief in his leadership, now seemed uncertain. The moment of clarity that had once guided him was slipping away. He had no choice but to move forward, but deep down he knew the stakes were higher than ever. The world was watching, and one wrong step could bring everything crashing down. As the pressure mounted, Peter made the fateful decision to push forward with his risky plan. The gamble involved a massive shift in strategy, one that would either solidify PayPal's dominance or mark its ultimate downfall. It wasn't just about innovation anymore. It was about survival. Peter began to realize that his obsession with control had blinded him to the bigger picture. The world around him was changing, and PayPal had to change with it. But the question was, had Peter already lost touch with the very ideals that had driven him? In a moment of clarity, he acknowledged that he was no longer just fighting for the company, he was fighting for his legacy. The battle was no longer about PayPal's future. It was about who Peter Thiel would become in the process. The repercussions of Peter's decision were felt almost immediately. PayPal's stock fluctuated wildly, and rumors began to swirl about the stability of the company. Investors, once supportive, now expressed doubt, and competitors seized the opportunity to move in. The gamble Peter had taken wasn't paying off, not yet at least. As days turned into weeks, the pressure on him only increased. His personal life had deteriorated further, and the isolation he felt was palpable. The weight of the world seemed to rest on his shoulders, and every step forward felt like another misstep. He had pushed himself and his company to the limit, and now he was beginning to wonder if the cost of his ambition was more than he could bear. The doubt that had once been a fleeting thought had now settled into a constant companion. Was it too late to change course? As the financial pressure continued to build, Peter realized that the battle for PayPal's survival was not one he could win alone. For the first time, he acknowledged that he needed help. The realization was humbling. Peter had always prided himself on his independence and ability to control every aspect of his company, but now he understood that his vision could no longer be realized through sheer willpower alone. He reached out to key figures, trusted mentors and allies from his past, people who could offer the guidance and support he had once rejected. In doing so, Peter began to see the bigger picture once again. The road to redemption, if it was even possible, would be long and fraught with difficulty. But for the first time in months, Peter felt a glimmer of hope. He had taken the first step toward acknowledging his limitations, and in doing so, he had taken a step toward finding a way out of the crisis. As the dust settled, Peter Thiel stood at the crossroads of his journey, facing both the consequences of his past decisions and the possibility of redemption. The world had watched him rise, fall, and struggle. PayPal had survived, but the cost had been high. The company, once an idealistic vision of disrupting the financial world, had evolved into something more complicated and fractured. Yet, amidst the chaos, Peter had discovered something vital. The path forward was no longer just about corporate battles or market dominance. It was about reconciling the man he had become with the person he had set out to be. The external challenges had subsided, but the internal ones were just beginning. The real question now was, could Peter redefine himself and continue to shape the future? Or had he already lost everything in the pursuit of power and control? Peter's redemption came not through grand gestures or dramatic overhauls, but through a series of quiet, thoughtful actions. He reached out to those who had once been close to him, co-founders, colleagues, and old friends. It wasn't easy, and not everyone was willing to forgive or forget. The trust that had been broken could not be easily mended, but Peter understood that rebuilding relationships was as crucial as rebuilding PayPal's future. He had become aware of the damage his ambition had caused, not just to his company, but to his personal life and his own sense of self. There were no shortcuts to healing. Peter had to face the fallout of his decisions head-on, and in doing so, he began to understand that true success wasn't about the empire he had built. It was about the person he had become along the way. Peter's next challenge was realizing that PayPal, while successful, was not the end of his journey. He had spent years believing that success in business defined his worth. Now, he knew that it was only one part of the story. The idea of reshaping the world, which had once consumed him, began to feel like a distant dream. But the fight for control had taught him invaluable lessons about the fragility of power, the importance of trust, and the need for collaboration. Peter found himself considering new ventures, ones that didn't revolve around winning at all costs, but rather about contributing meaningfully to the world. He began to seek ways to use his wealth and influence for positive change, focusing on projects that would truly make a difference, not just to his bank account, but to the people who could benefit from his efforts. The ultimate test of Peter's transformation came when he publicly addressed the lessons he had learned from his years of building PayPal. In a rare interview, Peter spoke openly about his mistakes, his regrets, and the realizations that had reshaped his view on success. For so long, he had been focused on winning, on power, and on control. But now he understood that true success came not from conquering the world, but from creating something that lasted beyond himself. His honesty in the interview was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a genuine moment of growth, while others questioned his motives. But for Peter, it was a necessary step toward healing, both for himself and for the legacy of PayPal. He knew that the road ahead would continue to be challenging, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. The battle for control had finally ended. The final chapter of Peter's story wasn't defined by the empire he had built or the battles he had fought. It was defined by the quiet moments of reflection, growth, and acceptance. Peter had learned that true power didn't come from dominance or control. It came from the ability to let go and allow others to share in the journey. He had spent years chasing a dream that he now realized had been incomplete. His journey had been one of ambition, loss, and redemption. And while the world around him continued to change, Peter had found something far more valuable than success. He had found peace within himself. PayPal had been the vehicle, but the destination was something much deeper, understanding that the pursuit of a meaningful life was far more important than any company or achievement.